I'm here as the founder of Smartistry, an organization that I launched to help artists get better connected with finance and the things that will help build a more sustainable creative life. And one of our key missions at Smartistry is to facilitate conversations that can drive change in our industry and help people make meaningful changes so that they can grow in their practice. So with all that said, it is an absolute delight to be with you for this session. I know that I am very excited to learn from our special guest today. One of the things that I've been struggling with was how best to promote our event today. So that might be one of the kinds of questions that we discuss with our guest, Michael J. Gibson. Welcome, Michael. I'm so glad that you're here. And for our guests, I would just love to share your bio briefly. Michael, you've shared with us that you are an art-loving, technology and accessibility-focused marketing professional who lives in the middle of data, design, and strategy. With experience in the hospitality, healthcare, and entertainment industries, Michael is driven by a desire to reintroduce respect for the consumer to marketing. He has spent years designing accessibility resources for coworkers and consumers with ADHD, color blindness, communication or stimulus processing issues, and more. And Michael has an obsession with mid-century ad typography, 80s, new wave, and East Coast punk, an aesthetic sharpened by years of working with comic artists, musicians, performers, and jointly managing a theater company. And by the way, his current creative inspiration, which I need to know more about, is the Dixie Cup jazz design. So set your mind back to that. Michael, thank you. Welcome. We are so glad to have you here.
I'm really excited to be here too. I think this is a really amazing program. I think that the biggest challenge for anybody in a creative field or founding a small business in any way is learning how to handle the business side of things. And I think it's lost on a lot of folks out there how much work goes into that, because you have to become your own operations manager, your own logistics person, your own accountant, your own marketer. And so, doing things like this and making life a little easier for small businesses and creators is sort of what I live for. So I'm really stoked to be here.
Oh, I love to hear that. Our team, the Reluctant Entrepreneurs Club team, was particularly excited to get to the topic of marketing, because I think this is an area that stresses us out and that let me just switch views here so that we're seeing more of your face, Michael. It stresses us out because there are so many different considerations. There are, everything from what do I want to say to how do I want to say it. Mm-hmm. So there's a little bit of art and science that goes into marketing, right?
Yeah, it really is. I mean, to be fair, marketing scares me, and I've been doing this for the better part of a decade or more. I think the thing that makes it so intimidating to a lot of folks is just in the last decade, we've seen like what the definitions of marketing is change very rapidly. Whereas like early on, marketing used to be, oh, we're going to have a promotion. We're going to have a sale. I'm going to buy a few ads. I'm going to put stuff out there and just tell people about my business. And if they like it, they'll come to me. With the rise of social media and with the availability of like digital advertising and so many entertainment streams becoming more and more ubiquitous, I think there's just an increase in not only expectation of the type of content that's being brought to consumers. So you see a lot of businesses doing more short form stuff on YouTube, things like that. But there's also an expectation of, getting to know the voice and the identity of the brand and the company overall. And I think for a long time that wasn't as flexible or as unpredictable as it is today. And so, yeah, I think the goalposts just shift a lot, and that can make it very intimidating.
one thing that I think is different now than it used to be is that we all have our own presence online. We all have our own spaces where we can talk about the things that excite us or that move us. And in turn, we're all parts of organizations that want to leverage those spaces, that want, many voices speaking to a common goal or initiative. So, considering a team or like a choral approach to a campaign is one thing. I don't think there ever has been a time like this before.
I don't think so either. I think it really has to do with the industry you're in first and foremost, because having been in the tech industry for a while, I think there it's a little more isolated. You have one or two people maybe on the other side of the office from the people producing the product, your coders, your developers, your engineers, and never the two shall meet. There's an expansion in sort of like the startup realm where you see a little bit more collaboration on that. But I don't think it's until you get into direct to consumer or entertainment verticals where you actually have a team working on putting them together. Now, a big part of that is because budgets tend to be significantly smaller. And another big part of that is everybody's time is generally much more, we'll call it a precious commodity. And so splitting it up between a number of people can be really effective. The one thing I would caution in that sort of environment is someone needs to be there needs to be an authority. There has to be a hierarchy in these sorts of situations, because at the end of the day, you can't pursue every piece of content you want to create. You can't pursue every single social media channel. Even with a small team, that can be really, really overwhelming. And so someone has to be steering that, planning what the content is going to be, overseeing the project management, overseeing the distribution, and then ultimately measuring the success of the content you put out. And having somebody who can answer those questions is very, very powerful in a way that even a collaborative environment can't bring all on its own.
Absolutely. So before we get into some really tactical advice from you, I know we've talked a lot about social media so far.
Mhm.
And I thought it might be beneficial to level set for our audience what the framing is, for this session today. Marketing is a humongous topic, and I think we're all kind of dying for some information, specifically around social media, because that's like, very, very present and accessible, and we have some direct control over that. Can you talk about why we're going to focus on some specific topics today and not others? Give us a little bit of a framing for the scope that you want to talk about today.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're gonna talk about two sort of separate levels of marketing overall. And the first is sort of like early marketing. So when you're ready for a launch, either of a company or a product or an event, sort of what planning goes into what you want to focus on from a marketing standpoint, like establishing goals, setting your timelines, things like that. And then secondarily, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the operations side of things. So things like considering customer experience, looking at data, looking at the different technologies available for people to leverage, especially on a shoestring budget. And then we'll touch a little bit on analytics and segmentation. But really that starts getting more into the full-time marketing role. So I'll tell you how to sort of find those snapshots to inform your marketing decisions. But sort of diving into customer segmentation and sales funnel lifecycle journeys, those are sort of topics all on their own. And there are sales engineers who are much more qualified to talk about those than I am. Where I fit is in marrying those two sides together. And so we're going to talk a lot about how the planning and the messaging can help inform the operations in a very efficient and effective way.
That's great. I think that will help our audience kind of brace themselves for what's to come. And I will say, we're going to have Q&A later on in this session. So as we're talking, to everybody that's joining us, if you think of a question and you want to either shout it, put it in the chat box and we'll come back to those. Kat and the rest of the team are looking at those questions. Also, you could just jot it down and then we're going to, kind of have a specific time for those questions later on. So I have many. So let's start with, well, you tell me if this is the right place to start. Should we start with talking about developing your voice and your brand and like a persona and how that reflects your event, your organization, your entity? Is that a good place for us? Okay.
That's definitely a great place to start. And this is the part of marketing that I think gets parodied very, very frequently. Especially on TV and things like that. You have the brand strategist who comes in and is just like, I've assembled this mood board and we're going to review it. What does this color say to you? How does it make you feel? But it's an integral part of the process, because identifying the identity and the voice with which your brand speaks and with your company speaks is going to directly impact the types of content you can pursue. The reason it works so well that Dollar Shave Club sponsors every podcast in the universe is because they made themselves like a ubiquitously entertaining brand, and they established from the beginning, we don't take ourselves seriously. You would very rarely find say a huge pharma company like AstraZeneca doing the same thing. Like, that's just not in their wheelhouse, because it doesn't fit their tone. It doesn't fit their persona. It doesn't fit their identity. So determining, are you fun? Are you serious? Are you witty? Are you clever? Because I think that's a very fine line, especially in marketing. Are you traditional? Are you bleeding edge? Are you organic? Finding a lot of these keywords, and I've put together like very very robust brand identity processes for some of my clients, and it's always very interesting, because when you start having that conversation, who are we? You can also have the conversation, who is our client? Who is our customer? And you're not always going to align with them 100%. And then finding where you overlap is where you really want to focus. I actually have a really, if people go to my website and go to my portfolio, there is a brand strategy and a brand identity worksheet in there, just freely available for folks to grab and use themselves. Now, the benefit of having me there along with it is because I can guide you through the process and sort of explain sort of what you're doing. But if you want to take a look at it, it's just an Excel spreadsheet. And so am I A or B? Am I C or D? And at the end, you compare to your customers. I think that's huge, because again, that's going to directly impact what marketing avenues you even want to invest in, be it time or money.
So we've got that link to your website up in our chat if anybody wants to check it out, but don't leave now, because there's lots more information. So save that for later. But I wanted to ask, would you take that same approach, that sort of assessment process, if you are the brand and the business is me as an artist and individual?
Absolutely. Now, I don't think that means you need to make your life 100% transparent to your customer, but you need to have a conversation with yourself about what parts of you are going to show through. You can almost look at it as taking on a character. We actually just today opened up a package from an Etsy seller that I've been following for a really long time. And when she posts on Etsy or Pinterest or something like that, she uses a lot of very specific terminology, speaking about her art, speaking about her process. She's obviously presenting herself as an authority. I am good at these ceramics because I have this experience. On her personal Facebook and Twitter, she doesn't do the same thing. That's just not what she's about. She's much more free form. She's much more, top of the head, off the cuff, discussion about what her process is, very transparent. This is what I screwed up. This is what I didn't. And for her, having that line is very clear. Now, some people want to give more of a peek behind that curtain, and others might not be as comfortable doing that. If you're not as comfortable, like I said, consider it a character. You are essentially creating a face that you want people to interact with online, or in other forms of marketing, in person, print, whatever. It's okay for that not to be 100% you as a person, and still say, this is me as a person, because I think most reasonable people understand that they're not getting the whole you, they're getting the contextualized you. So I would really encourage individual persona brands and artists to also go through a system of establishing that brand identity, establishing that voice, and determining what it is, because it might not be as easy as saying, I'm just going to talk about what I'm doing, because it just might not work in your voice.
That's a great point. We have a bunch of folks on the call today who are performers, who are on the stage, and who already have a skill set for creating a persona, for interrogating the different qualities of a put on character. So I think, for those of us that feel like marketing is so foreign, maybe you already have some of these skills in your toolkit. You just need to think of them through a different lens. So I wanted to get a little bit more nuts and bolts as we kind of dig in here. We've talked a little bit about forming your persona and, thinking creatively about what kind of space you want to take up, what kind of brand identity you want. So to the next step, what platforms are essential for the folks that are, on the call today? We've seen what everybody's background is a little bit. Where should we check off, yes, I have a space here, here, and here?
Yeah. So personal opinions on Mark Zuckerberg and Jack Dorsey aside, almost any brand immediately benefits from having a Facebook or a Twitter profile. The tones and the type of promotions that are done on each of those platforms does tend to be a little bit different. So for a lot of artists who are distributing content, or teasing portfolios and things like that, like visual artists, Twitter is usually a much, much better fit. For longer term engagements and promotions, like setting up for an event or theater performances or gatherings, events, meetings, things like that, Facebook is going to be a little bit more effective. What it comes down to is setting your goals for your marketing and knowing what those goals are, both in a high level organizational, like year-long goal setting kind of way, and then also establishing what your goals are in the short term for each individual promotion. If you want more followers, the type of content you create is going to be very conversational. It's going to be very engaging in like a one-to-one way. If you're looking at sales, you need to make sure to always, include a call to action. You need to make sure that you're being carefully considerate about what your links are, where you're sending people, what that sales funnel and that journey looks like. So the thing to really keep in mind is, what do you want to do? And that will help you work backwards from there. For point of reference, if we're going to use hypotheticals for the rest of the conversation, let's just call it a theater company wants to have $100,000 in ticket revenue for the year. And then we can work backwards from that. Well, we already know that, Facebook is a better platform for events and for long-term engagements. So let's make sure we have a Facebook profile. We also need to understand where our audience lives. So understanding their demographics. And that's when you start getting into more like analytics and things, but you know what your goal is. And so immediately, long-term events, here's our goal, it's revenue. And then you can construct around that to measure those conversions and that success.
And I know that the platforms offer those analytics to help you measure as you work through those goals.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me, why is Facebook better than LinkedIn or even Instagram?
Well, there's a couple things. Instagram is limiting because you can't include a direct link in each post. You have to either swap out the link in your bio to each individual event, or you have to manage a third-party link tree style like portfolio page. That presents its own issues because what if the link works on one page but doesn't work on the other, and you have to remember to update it when you put the content out there. Facebook allows you sort of like the most seamless. I'm going to copy paste, what I've drafted into the file or into the text editor on Facebook. I'm going to attach the photo. I'm going to drop the link in, and I'm done. I know it's going to work when it decides to work. Again, opinions on Facebook aside, it's just efficient, and that's kind of what it comes down to. Is and I saw somebody say something in the chat about certain types of marketing feel icky. Yeah, definitely. I don't like supporting Mark Zuckerberg or creating traffic on Twitter for people like that. But unfortunately, it's where people are gathering right now. It's sort of like the digital picnics. It's where people are gathering and expect communication. But I think the onus is then on the organization and the brand going through that brand identity to establish what their voice is and make sure that their voice is as ethically delivered as possible on those platforms within your goals. I don't think there's anything preventing people from setting really aggressive goals in revenue or sales and still creating content as ethically as possible. I think those two can very much go hand in hand. You just have to decide to as part of your brand.
I agree. That's something that we're tackling a lot at Smartistry is mindset around capitalism, around managing money, and about having a financial goal all
Mm-hmm.
together. We do art for art's sake, but we can do more art if we can feed ourselves. So,
Yeah, exactly. I'm
so
much
it is
better
a
at my
means
job
to
when
an
I'm not
end.
hungry.
Right. So I agree with your take that the floor is yours on those platforms to be transparent, to
Mhm.
be authentic, and to be quite aggressive about your values. I think that's a great place to showcase the changes that you want to see and the way that you'd idealistically like the industry to function.
Mhm.
So you can choose to make it a space that feels better for you, I
Yeah.
think.
And if you feel really strongly about it, you don't have to use those platforms. Email marketing, sort of nurturing a very niche group of customers that you have interpersonal relationships with, or have more direct communication with via email newsletters or things like that, SMS messages, things like that, where you're sending in more direct channels, can be just as, if not more effective at meeting your goals. Or maybe your audience doesn't even live on Facebook. Maybe they are a Pinterest, heavy group. I know for a couple of my clients that do embroidery work, Pinterest is like and is huge for them because
Sure.
when they share an image, they can have that image lead directly to a page where they're selling their pattern. Um, I think as long as you're telling people precisely what you're providing and you're being, I don't want to say aggressive because that's not the right word. We'll call it efficient in your language and making it very clear, like this post is meant to be transactional. I think you can keep a lot of that above board. Personally, I tend to run a lot of my social media for my clients and myself in a much more conversational way. But I'm very comfortable doing that as myself, and not a lot of people are. Maybe you want to have a screen up. I never want to presume anything for any creator. I know that there are a lot of people out there who have, folks in their past they don't want to be able to find them. And so they want to have that firewall up between their brand and their personal identity. I think that is something that can definitely be managed, again, by understanding what your goals are and where your audience is. And if people are interested, we can talk a little bit about analyzing audiences and demographics and get into it, or we can talk a little more about the platforms themselves. I think it depends on what your audience would find useful.
That's a great question. Can we put in the chat right now if you want to talk about either of those topics? Do we have a little informal straw poll? That's a marketing technique, right?
We do. We do. In fact, ta-da! What social media platforms are you looking for help with?
Oh, perfect.
This is a multiple choice question, so answer as many times as you would like.
And you know what? That's the thing is all of these platforms have different best practices. They have different languages in them. You know, almost there's different unwritten rules for engagement. You know, they're their own little self-contained societies, and it can be difficult to parse out. If you're just coming in, you know, I can't tell you how many people I have had email me or send me messages saying, "Should we make a TikTok?" Like, no. Not unless you know what you want to do on TikTok. Why would you just start doing it? Like, let's plan this out. Let's make sure it makes sense. So 100%, each one of these is its own different beast. And I want to make sure we're giving people the most effective info possible.
Well, it's definitely looking like people are interested in Instagram.
Ooh, okay.
A lot of people on Instagram. There's equally as many people interested in Twitter. Mm-hmm. And strangely enough, the next front runner is YouTube and then Facebook.
Okay. Okay.
There is one vote for an other. So if anybody feels free to drop that into the chat, what that other platform would be.
I would like to discuss promoting my Xanga, please.
What is Xanga? I don't even know what that is.
Oh my God, Xanga was like a live journal kind of platform. It was like in that MySpace live journal era.
GeoCities era.
Yep. Okay. Xanga was one of the early social media platforms. I think it was much more popular internationally than in the US. I believe.
Fascinating.
Yeah. If somebody who knows Xanga in the chat, that's great.
I don't know that one, but I think I had all of the rest of the above. And now thank you for making me feel old, Michael.
You are very welcome. Okay, so I do want to touch on what somebody in the chat just asked about managing YouTube with ADHD. Most of my work these days is very accessibility focused, and I know YouTube was a little down the list, but we can touch on this very rapidly. The key to making your content in video more, I want to say, more accessible for both creating it as a neurodivergent individual, as well as creating content for people with sensory processing issues or autism or any sort of scenario like that, is in making sure that you are giving them clear information. So limiting euphemisms and metaphors, make sure you're saying exactly what you're trying to communicate so that people don't have to figure out if you're speaking satirically or there's no misunderstanding of metaphor. If you want to tell somebody, you know, measure twice, cut once, say, you need to focus you need to make sure you're cutting this precisely. You want to make sure that you don't have to fix an issue in the future. Things like that. Limiting your color palette on splashes and transitions and lower thirds can also be good, because I know one of the things I do as an individual, for instance, that makes my brand a little less accessible to people with sensory processing issues is I use a very bright orange on all of my content. And I know that makes it a little bit less accessible. So I try to mute that by doing all of my design work on a more muted color as opposed to straight white. But if you put like orange on white or highlighter pink on white on YouTube, that's going to be very dazzling and it's going to lead to a lot of distraction. Making sure your audio is balanced, you don't have any big spikes in volume. Making sure that you don't have any repeatedly flashing icons or like a spinning logo in the corner. That one gets a lot of people. Little things like that, just making sure that you're facilitating focus not only means that people will absorb your information more clearly, it means that you can better serve people who do have sensory processing issues as well.
Great question. Thank you. And I appreciate that answer. As we talk more about the platforms, I would love to incorporate your expertise in accessibility considerations.
I will absolutely drop that stuff in alongside.
Thank you.
So you said the big platform that people wanted to discuss was Instagram?
I think it was Instagram, right, Kat?
Yes. Yes.
Thanks.
Okay. Okay, so Instagram overall. Instagram can be a little bit tricky because you're communicating most of what you're trying to tell people in an image, and you're trying to engage them in such a way that they then move from that image to your caption to get additional information. That can be difficult to do if you are a performing arts organization, because you don't always have those pictures until very far along in your development process. And that's when you can sort of start giving people content like behind the scenes photos, interviews, content along those lines, making people feel like they're a part of the development process. But Instagram also really lends itself to visual artists in a way that I think all the other platforms don't. Like, you can like really, really spotlight craftsmanship, and you can spotlight detail on Instagram, and that audience wants to see those things in a way that Twitter users don't necessarily. You know, on Twitter, people are scrolling through their feed very quickly. They're going to see an image and go, that's cool. They're going to keep going. On Instagram, you're going to find people much more willing to unpack what you put out if they find it visually intriguing. Contrasting colors, patterns, high detail images, infographics tend to be pretty big as well. Those can, you know, a little snapshot of an infographic or one panel, or you can do a carousel of panels. That's very shareable with like information. Treat it like a little bit of a slideshow. That's also a very effective way to leverage Instagram. So the downside with Instagram is that from an accessibility standpoint, it is incredibly exclusionary to blind and low vision and colorblind users. The way to get around that is, or to facilitate for them, is to provide alt text. Alt text is essentially just an embedded piece of text where you translate what the image is and describe what the image is for people using screen reader technology and assistive devices. Some platforms let you drop alt text directly into a file. Twitter lets you edit alt text directly. LinkedIn also lets you edit alt text directly, which I think is really cool of LinkedIn. Pinterest does it natively as part of the image description, but then they've also integrated I believe, a tagging system for some screen readers as well. That's very, very new. I don't know how effective it is. I haven't heard. But with Instagram, surprisingly, the most effective way to provide those transcriptions is in the caption of the image itself, because of the way that assistive technology is going to go through that post. It's going to identify that it's an image, and then it's going to read the content. The best way to put that out there is to just put your caption, whatever your caption is going to be first, and then put in your alt text before hashtags, because the last thing you want to have people listen to before they get to a description of the image after reading your caption is, you know, hashtag ticket sales, hashtag boss life, hashtag home office, hashtag dogs of DC, you know, like just everything you put on there in that hashtag soup in Instagram, which I don't necessarily agree with, but the platform facilitates it. You want to make sure they get a description of the image first, and using very clear, concise language. Keep it under 125 words or so, and that's going to be pretty effective. Now, for hashtags on Instagram, Instagram is one of the few platforms where the hashtag is still really effective. A lot of people still use them on Twitter, and some people still leverage them on Facebook. Both of those have been sort of devalued by both of those platforms. You know, they're very good to compartmentalize data, but they'll also search for those same posts with just the plain text. So say, for instance, you were to search hashtag startup on Twitter. You're going to get the same results as if you just searched startup. The only place where that's of benefit on those secondary platforms is events. So, holidays, any national or international days like International Day of the Puppy. Putting that in a hashtag would probably be effective. But for most cases, Instagram's the only place you're going to leverage a lot of those. And I would really encourage people to research what hashtags to use. Take a look at which ones get used. If there is a variation between a plural or a singular, author versus authors, and authors has 10,000 posts, but author has, 1.5 million. The question you need to ask yourself then is, do I think I'm going to get better engagement and less competition in the smaller environment, or do I want to focus on the busier one where there's more traffic? And depending where you are in your brand development cycle, that question can be very different, and it depends on the goals you set for your company.
Wow. I'm sure we have more follow-up questions on Instagram. So if you have any more questions before we move on to other platforms, you can certainly put them in here. One thing I've had a question about is just, as a creative, our process is creating the product, creating the event, the experience, whatever it is that we're making. How much should the creation of this content, this promotional content that's going on Instagram, let's say, be what percentage of our process should be focused on adding that layer?
Oh, that is such an individualized question. I'll do my best to answer it. What it comes down to is, what are you finding effective? If you are a creator, let's use that hypothetical. Let's keep going back to that theater. That theater wants $100,000 in ticket revenue for the year. And they post on Instagram, once a week leading up to their next show. And they find they have, 100 tickets sold. And the next show, they go, okay, well, we posted once a week and we sold 100 tickets. If we post twice a week, we'll sell 200 tickets. And so then they go through the process to add in a whole nother post per week and really diving into that and making sure they're creating the same kind of content. And then the next show comes up and they only sold 120 tickets. Now the question they need to be asking themselves is, was the additional time and effort we put into doing more content worth the return on the back end? And that's when we start getting into some of these analytics and how you want to measure your goals. For me, I tend to recommend that you post at least once a week on Facebook, at least 3 days a week on Twitter, and at least twice a week on Instagram, depending on which one of those platforms you're leveraging the most. That's the bare minimum that I have found to be effective and efficient. Any less than that, and the algorithm is going to devalue you and make it harder for your post to get in front of your audience in the first place. And if you're just churning out a lot of content that looks exactly the same, your audience is going to get very disconnected and unfollow you. So it's a fine line. And after every piece of content you put out, after every week, you could probably get away with every month if you're doing everything yourself. But if you have a dedicated marketer, if you have somebody you're working with who's overseeing this, they should really be looking at this every week or so to assess what's working, what's not, what people are responding to, and the type of content that's driving conversions, whatever those conversion goals are. So again, bare minimum, twice a week on Instagram, 3 to 4 times a week on Twitter, once a week on Facebook. If you can't commit to that on the platform, don't use that platform, because it's more irritating for your consumer to go to search out your Twitter handle and find you and then go to it and decide that's how they're going to communicate with you, to find you haven't posted there since 2016. But you're active on all these other platforms. If you give people an opportunity to talk to you on the platform, make sure you're engaged there. So don't try to open them all at once. Pick the one you think you're going to be able to commit to the most and start building there first. and then reassess how much time you're putting into your content creation.
Amazing. One additional detail. So you've given us the frequency of posts at a minimum.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a best practice now for when is optimal to post? I feel like that is constantly shifting.
It is, and hilariously, the quarantine times have really shifted a lot of that data, because more and more people are living much more digitally focused lives. By and large, there are many platforms out there that claim to be able to give you like the best times to post. For my money and my time, the organization that has done that the best has been a social media aggregate platform called Sprout Social. They really have a tremendously robust library of clients that feed them data on engagement rate. And what Sprout Social does differently is a lot of those guides you'll find on Pinterest, a lot of the guides you'll find smaller marketing agencies putting out there. Look at the data that Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and Pinterest put out there, where they say the most of our users are active at such a time of day on such a day a week. Great. There's like 13 billion Twitter accounts. I don't need to speak to all of them. I need to know when the people in my industry and my consumers are active, not when everybody's active. Sprout Social actually breaks those time recommendations out by industry. I don't remember all of them off the top of my head, but entertainment is there. And then entertainment is also broken out into both live and streamed content. So if you're a theater, obviously live events have been very difficult for the last year. So finding out when people are still talking about that online is going to be important as you start ramping your businesses back up. There's also, business to business Twitter, where those people are active on a certain amount of time. So if you're trying to sell a service, if you're a executive assistant, or you're a project manager, or you're a life coach and you want to talk to CEOs, knowing when they're active is going to be different, and Sprout Social breaks a lot of that out. High level, the best cheat code I can give you is that think about when you use your phone. You use it when you wake up in the morning. You sort of look at it and go, did anything interesting happen overnight? Let me check in with the world before I get out of bed. Around lunch, when you take a break and like really sit down and sort of go, okay, I worked for a while. I'm going to sit down. I'm going to decompress. And then in transit on the way home, if you're going to an office, or in the early evening before dinner, while people are still in that downtime between work and dinner. To that end, about 9 a.m. local time, about noon local time, and about 4 p.m. local time are going to be your best times in general to post overall. But again, I'd encourage you to look at the insights and analytics pages that Facebook and Twitter and Instagram provide, because there is actually going to be a link on those pages that let you see when your audience is active. If you already have a Facebook account, you can go to Facebook, you can go to business.facebook.com, or go to your page insights on your reporting, and they'll show you what time your audience is awake. Also, are you selling internationally? Should you be making sure you're providing content for people overseas? If you have an Etsy shop and you ship internationally, maybe try scheduling a post using something like Sprout Social to post while you're asleep, but the Australia folks are now at 9 a.m. local time, or noon local time. If you have people buying there, or you want to expand to selling there. It's goals, execution, and analytics. And it's this rotating wheel that's going to go over and over and over again for every platform and every promo and goal you have. But investing the time to establishing what that wheel looks like, knowing your planning, knowing your goals, knowing your process, and then looking at it at the end is going to get you into a good rhythm that's going to get more and more effective over time. You're going to find the amount of time you spend decreases, but your conversion rates are going to go up the more closely engaged you are with your audience.
I want to ask one additional question. Before we are going to open things up and ask folks to turn on their cameras and, give you their own direct questions. Thank you everyone who has put questions into the chat so far and comments. We really appreciate them.
Oh yeah, I see somebody just mentioned I have a following in the UK. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
And that data can get skewed. So now you need to add additional goals checking to see, okay, are the people in the UK buying my product? Are they backing my Patreon? Are they buying me a coffee? If they are, let's serve them. If they're not, let's invest our time here at home.
One last question before we open things up, if you can still hear me.
Yes.
If we're doing everything optimally, how important is it to make an investment to the paid promotional level on our given platform?
Okay. That's a big one. Short answer, if people take nothing else away from this entire thing, don't buy ads on Facebook. Don't do it. Don't boost a post. Don't buy an ad. Don't invest in a carousel. Don't do promoted Instagram posts. Programmatic ad fraud on social has become a trillions of dollar a year industry for both the platform itself, because Facebook gets paid every time somebody clicks one of your ads, but then also people manipulating that data and all of the additional ad trackers. All the cookies and stuff that load when you go to a page, every single time one of those touches your browser, someone's getting a tiny bit of money. And so there is a deep incentivization in digital advertising to charge you as the advertiser the most money possible by putting your ad in the fewest places possible. And while targeting can be very, very powerful, and this is where I differentiate from a lot of marketers out there who are focused on like growth hacking, and we come back to the ethics side. There is enough data in Facebook Ad Manager alone where I can pinpoint target my ads to people who look and think and feel and buy exactly the way I want them to. But the amount of data that gets scraped from those individuals on a daily basis, to me, makes that wildly unethical. And so I choose not to invest my time and energy as a marketer into paid advertising. Now, from an ethics standpoint, that's one thing. From an efficacy standpoint, unless you are a digital advertising professional, I promise you, you don't know how to use those tools. I barely know how to use those tools, and I've been doing this for a decade. Unless you're really, really, really good at them, you're not going to be as efficient as you want to be. And a lot of that time and a lot of that budget can be placed into other avenues that are going to make your life better and easier and allow you to serve your customers in a more ethical way. So short answer, never buy digital ads on social. Slightly longer answer, it might be efficient, but it's not ethical. Flip side of that coin, though, because I will say this is an area that I've really fallen in love with over the last few years. If you want to do digital advertising, consider sponsoring somebody else doing content. There are hundreds of thousands upon thousands of podcasts out there where there are creators really, really desperate to keep the lights on and are creating really engaging content. Maybe some of you are that person. If you have a spare $100 for a quarter of advertising, go to a smaller podcast, go to a smaller creator and say, hey, I want to partner with you. I do X. I thought you would think that was cool. You do Y. I think what you do is really cool. Here's $100. Give people a quick 15-second blurb at the start of your show talking about what I do, or I'll be a guest, or you can come at it sideways in a more collaborative way. And I find that those engagements tend to have a much better return long-term than a short form boosted post does. I would encourage people to look at sponsorships as a very clear alternative to ads.
What a great win-win. What a great way to build community and build raving fans. I love it. I love it. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to Kat, and I know we're getting ready to open things up to you. I have loved this conversation. I have learned so much so far.
I am glad. I know that there were a couple answers that sort of went on forever, but this is a really complex industry, y'all. I'm so sorry.
There's a lot to it, and you know it all.
This has been really good. This has been great. I know that we've had some really wonderful questions pop up. Let's see. I believe that some of them have already been covered. One of the things that I think I would like to hear a little bit more about, possibly, especially with the many hats that most creative entrepreneurs need to end up wearing, whether or not you wanted to be an entrepreneur in the first place, you see the show title. How do you juggle all those balls? Like, as far as specifically the marketing and the social media, do you have any tips on how to basically project manage that?
Yeah. There's two ways to answer this question. There's the money is no object version, and then there's the I have $0 and I have a cell phone bill due option. I'll try to quickly touch on both, and then we can dig in if people have specific questions. Best solution for anyone doing marketing is an automation utility. Again, I'm going to recommend Sprout Social. Though big caveat, there are some organizations that Sprout Social does work with, including immigration and customs, who some users maybe don't want to give them money by using a premium or paid subscription. I would really, really encourage people to do your due diligence to find out who uses some of these platforms. Improvato is one, Hootsuite is another, Sprout Social is a big one, and that's the one I'm the most familiar with. But there's also some smaller ones. Marketo is one I really recommend to a lot of people, and they actually have this little bonus machine intelligence layer called Maestro, which is one of those like, where does your data really go kind of tools. But they've been very clear and ethical in saying we aggregate it into a gigantic data lake. We can't individually identify people, but we can identify demographic shifts, which is what makes me recommend them. And that organization is called Mautic, M-A-U-T-I-C. They're very cool. But all of those platforms, in order for them to be really effective, you kind of have to pay for a premium account. And normally those come with a year-long agreement, and most of them prefer that you pay up front. And those can run anywhere from $350 for the year all the way up to $15,000 to $20,000 for the year, depending on how much power is under the hood and sort of what you're trying to do. Hootsuite and Sprout Social are going to be the smallest and most affordable. But again, you might want to consider who's using them before you give them money. On a smaller budget, if you invest the time to give yourself a routine, establish your documentation, your cycle. What I tend to do for people when I onboard them as a client is I say, okay, we're going to do a couple things. We're going to establish what your goals are. We're going to take a look at what your performance metrics are over the last year. All of it's going to go into this single document, and you can look at everything at once. I would encourage people to make a document like that for themselves. I have a Twitter account and I have a Facebook account. And in January, I had 20 followers on Facebook and 50 on Twitter. In February, I had 25 followers on Facebook and 3,000 on Twitter. Obviously, Twitter is where I should spend my time. I'm going to focus there. Little pieces of analytics and review like that can really help dedicate sort of what your time management is going to be. Because if you don't have to create content for every platform after a little while, that's going to save you some time. And getting into the routine of what that content looks like. Templatize things. I promise you, if you take the time to put together a little like social media template or like a little overlay that you're going to put on stock photos that you find or create yourself or things like that, that immediately lifts your content in a way that a lot of your competitors aren't going to be leveraging. And it doesn't take a lot of time after the initial round. You can just drop that little, border, ARM, I know, for instance, uses that bracket border on all of your Instagram posts. That's a really easy template. It brands it as an ARM piece of content. It looks really nice. It stays within the brand guidelines, and it has a very clear aesthetic. All of that gets communicated very quickly. And the time it took was you made it the first time and you put it on everything after. And so that initial investment of time is going to be the big mountain. After that, just focus on what works. Interestingly enough, back when I was in the tech sector, a lot of my work was focused on assessing the Google algorithm specifically, and to a lesser extent, Facebook. What I can tell you is there is very, very little the individual poster can do to game that system in such a way that you're going to guarantee it shows up in front of people. So I really wouldn't worry about it too much. The exception to that is if you're working in some more sensitive industries. The cannabis industry, for instance, is a big one. Food and drink is another one. And then we'll call it adult entertainment, up to and including burlesque as well. There are some keywords and some content types that the algorithm will automatically filter out to a lower priority just because they have their own brand safety guidelines and regulations to follow as a platform, and they're going to censor that the way they choose to for their investors. For the most part, as long as you're being conversational and as long as you're providing engaging content, I wouldn't worry too much about precisely where in your post you put a link, because the positioning of that kind of little thing isn't going to move the needle enough for you to worry about it.
When you're posting and, if you're not paying too much attention to the algorithm there, how important is it to then comment on the comments that you receive or to have exchanges after the post has already gone out?
So engagement is the primary weight behind algorithmic displays on social. So the more likes, the more comments, the more shares, the more impressions you're going to have as it distributes to further and further networks. And the more networks it crosses over, the higher priority weight that post gets in the algorithm. There are a few other markers that contribute. For instance, one of the reasons PewDiePie got so big when he did was because at the time, the algorithm really, really weighted international traffic. And he was technically posting internationally for a lot of his content to the UK from Sweden. And then when it moved over to the US, it got another boost. Most creators aren't going to have those sort of big flags in the algorithm. So as long as there is engagement, if you have friends, always asking for a retweet, saying something as simple as, we'd love for you to buy a ticket to this show. It's pay what you want. If you don't have anything, a retweet's always free or a comment's always free. And then you can be playful with it. I very regularly on some of the content I put out there, write, things akin to, I'm going to put this link in the next tweet because the algorithm sucks, or, we have to feed the algorithm, so comment below. And it can be a really, cute way to engage people and sort of nudge and say, look, I know this isn't fun, but it's the way that we can grow as a business. So help us out.
Wonderful.
I love the idea of removing the artifice. I love that.
Mm-hmm. It makes it feel a lot more, the phrase I keep coming back to is less scuzzy.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm just one of those people that, like, if I go into a department store, I hate when the salespeople feel like they need to come up and sell things to me.
Mm-hmm.
I usually will have like an idea of what I want, or if I need something, I'll ask. But that's one of the things that I've always hated myself personally about trying to create content or social media stuff, especially if there's something specific that I like to ask the audience.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really, that sounds like a really good way to say, hey, this is what's being asked, just so you know, without it being extra.
And staying active is important. If your account goes silent for 3 months at a time in between, a show being produced or a project being worked on, when you come back and post again to tell people about it, you're going to be devalued in the algorithm. So consistency is probably the biggest way to improve your performance over anything else. It can be difficult to say, but I will tell you the smallest engagement I tend to consult on is about 10 hours a week. Any less than that, and I have found that I am not able to do my job as effectively when working with my clients. Now, most of that work is social media focused. My smaller engagements tend to be social media only. So that includes the content, the planning stage, like the strategy and drafting stage, the posting, the engagement and monitoring while it's up and active, and then the analytics on the back end. I think if you can dedicate 10 hours a week, you're probably doing yourself a tremendous service. Minimum I would do is probably an hour a day. Anything less than that, and my concern would be is that something in that rotation is probably going to get lost just because you need time to settle in, you need time to get focused, you need time to do research. It's easy to get distracted. I do it all the time. I watch YouTube a lot while I work, and occasionally I'll be like, oh, I'm now 20 videos into this playlist and I've written 4 sentences. I should maybe switch to music instead. I don't bill my clients when that sort of thing happens, but it gets away from you. But yeah, if you want a quick and easy guide, 10 hours a week as a small business owner, and that should treat you pretty well. I think this is sort of why the transparency in marketing is such an integral part of like what I do as a professional, is because I have been on the flip side of that, where I have wanted to partner with somebody as a client. We sign everything, and then the client is just always unhappy. Like nothing is, because they didn't understand what their goals were. They didn't understand sort of what the relationship was going to be. It's frustrating on both sides. So I really get where you're coming from. Nobody who promises to be able to serve every single client exactly the same way and get the same results, nobody who promises that is being truthful with you. Yes, there is a cottage industry of SEO professionals out there who will promise the world based on keywords and backlinks and SERP analytics and link placement and alt text manipulation and keyword stuffing and H1 tags. And, they could go through the whole laundry list and until your eyes go blurry by telling you all the things that they're going to do. It's not that effective. I mean, really, the Google search is so hyper local, and the algorithm is now so focused on conversational and local and high priority results that unfortunately, a small business like yours isn't going to be competitive on some broader keywords like just entertainment or things to do in Chicago. But you might be able to compete on a neighborhood level. You might be able to compete on a community area or city level. And not all SEO professionals are going to focus on that. I would recommend when assessing contractors in the marketing sphere, try to stick with people who have experience in your industry specifically, because they're going to bring a level of passion and engagement that matches your audience and yourself in a way that a one-size-fits-all agency or software service can't match. I would recommend looking at things like, if they have it on their resume, their volunteer or outreach work, because that's going to show you the industries and the areas that they're most passionate about. I would talk to them a little bit about, what specifically they think they can bring to I would call an escape room sort of like the middle of the Venn diagram between hospitality and entertainment. So ask them, how they would marry those two branches. Ask them. I would always hesitate don't make anybody do spec work, because I personally, as a contractor, find that a little insulting. But I don't think there's anything wrong with asking them, okay, when you've worked with clients that look like me, where the business is like this, what have you found has been effective? A marketer worth their salt, I can sit here all day long and tell you to post on Twitter and Facebook. That's not going to take anything out of my pocket. And they should be able to have a very specific conversation with you about what they see as opportunities before any paperwork is ever signed. If they're unwilling to get specific on what they see as an opportunity for growth, they probably don't know how to engage your audience the same way. So look at what they're passionate about, ask them to be specific. And if they waffle on it, if you're not comfortable, there's always another consultant out there to talk to. It is very easy to buy emails to send email blasts to. You would be shocked at how cheap it is. I regularly see packages of millions of email addresses. I think the most recent ad I got was for a package of 10.5 million emails, specifically in the cloud services sector, and it was like $50. It was nothing. And buying that was 100% legal, because those people had all clicked EULAs that allowed this company to resell their info. And so if I dump all those emails into my MailChimp and send to everybody all 10.5 million, I still haven't technically broken any laws, but I have done something a little slimy.
I also like your reminder, Michael, that there really aren't any magic wands. There's no magic formula that is going to fit and fix everything for everyone. That it really does matter who you're working with, and who, not only your company, your business, like the demographic that you're trying to, to do is, but also, who your audience is. And there's a lot of context there, and just being able to even do all of that and know what that information is, and having those answers even before you go into it, sounds like it can make a big difference.
Yeah, you should always be able to, with any, I think a lot of you know this because you've either worked as a freelancer or work with a lot of freelancers. You should be able to have a very frank conversation with anyone you're bringing on board to help grow your business of, what are we going to do? What are the results going to be? How are we going to measure them? And how much is it going to cost? I think if you can't answer all 4 of those questions in your first meeting, it's probably not going to be a particularly efficient process. It might be effective. Now, it might be effective, but it's not going to be an efficient or enjoyable process. So, just make sure that people know what the expectations are, and that's part of that goal setting. Really, everything comes down to know what your goals are and know how you're going to measure them. And outside that, everything else will kind of fall into place for you.
But I'm not a visual person. I've never been, as a theater director, not great with the staging, really good with the text, so I struggle with my taste. I struggle with finding a visual vocabulary for my brand. And would you have any resources to recommend or strategies for how to expand that?
So just so I'm clear, are you talking about in how to come up with your brand identity, or how to create content?
How to create content.
Okay. So the best thing I can recommend to you is, again, try to consider how you consume content. Most times, if you are a small business owner or an individual creator, the aesthetic of your company is at least partially shared with your own personal aesthetic. So go ahead and make sure that you're following, your favorite accounts from your business account, so you still see those interesting posts. I wouldn't spend time following a whole bunch of investors if you're never going to pursue investment. It's one of those things where put the time where you're going to be engaged. For in terms of creating ideas, there are some best practices and some guides out there. There's actually a really awesome page from a couple years ago from Bootcamp Digital, which is basically a list of ideas on the types of content to create in case you ever have one of those brainstorming sessions and you go, I just don't know what to do this week. You can take a look at that and get some ideas. Memes are always great. If there's a conversation happening, picking up on that format can be fun. But the thing I think to keep in mind with any marketing period is people are smart enough to understand when they're being sold to, especially if you're being clear about I'm selling something to you. So make sure you have more than just calls to action. Make sure you're actually engaging. When you start having those conversations with your customers, I think you'll find that the content sort of flows from there, because you're gonna develop a shared language with your customers. You're gonna develop your own little micro cultural mores and norms within your little network, and assessing those would be good. There's little tips and tricks you can do on all of them. Video content for a while was very, very highly rated in the algorithm. Links early on were very highly rated, but for my money, just a very clear, concise, text-only post can sometimes have the biggest effect of all, as long as you're using that shared language with your customer community.
I also really we had a couple of suggestions in the chat about making your text really pretty and posting that, which I really like too. Because I mean, it kind of reminds me of what Michael was saying earlier about infographics going over really well on Instagram and stuff. So if you're using a platform or your people are on that platform, taking the words that you want to say and making something, very pretty.
Yeah.
Sounds like a great way to handle that.
Pretty is a sliding scale. It's subjective. What I can tell you is this, is that larger platforms didn't care until there were a couple of very recent lawsuits about it. But now that there is judicial precedence, a lot of companies are focusing more on accessibility of content. To that end, I have just recently finished a digital design accessibility guide for marketing purposes for small businesses and creators. So focusing on things like color palette selection, typography selection, alt text being included, tags for screen readers and assistive devices, whether or not something, I see somebody said, speed and mobile interaction, designing for mobile first, hosted speed first content is very, very big. We are getting to a point where accessibility is becoming profitable. And so as a result, if you get in early by adopting something called, and this link is in the infographic I put together, Wcag standards for web accessibility, they're being very quiet about it, but Google I've done the research, they do provide an additional 10 to 12% lift on SEO performance for an accessible site versus a non-accessible site when every piece of content is completely identical. And that was something that we only recently started getting enough data to be able to demonstrate. But the social platforms are very, very quickly following suit. If you post an image that doesn't have alt text, I would not be surprised if Twitter started deprioritizing that in their algorithm. If you're on Instagram and you don't have a robust descriptive content, I would not be surprised if Facebook starts deprioritizing that content. So get in the habit to make your content accessible now, and you'll probably find it's going to be very effective for you within the next year or so. It's not a super fun thing to think about, but start thinking about a lot of the people with cognitive dysfunction as a result of the COVID epidemic. Having more concise, clear, easily legible, easily processed content is going to be really important in the next year or so, just to make sure that people can absorb what you're saying. Considerations like that are going to be more and more important.
That's a really good point. And also just to remember that, I mean, there are people who already have accessibility needs, and every single site they go to, every single time they're trying to see a post, anytime they walk out their door, there's something that they're having to deal with that makes, that adds extra decisions and ways for them to have to go about things that we don't have to think about. So it may be a little thing for us to have to take an extra 5-10 minutes to do it, but that also means that we are taking some of that burden off the people who have to deal with it like 24 hours a day.
And again, if you templatize it early on, it's not even going to take you 10 minutes. It'll maybe take you an hour to figure out what your posts on each platform are going to look like to be as accessible as possible. And then it's just putting a puzzle together every time you're doing it. You know what it's supposed to look like, you know where all the pieces go, assemble it, and you can be your own little personal social media accessible IKEA. I cannot recommend having a content planning calendar enough. Sitting down and looking at the year and saying, okay, when are things happening that I want to talk about? Be they holidays or releases or events or publications, things like that. Know when you're going to be talking about those, and then you can sort of plan what those ebbs and flows are going to look like. And having a content planning calendar also means that you can maybe for people with hyperfocus issues, for instance, if you have a document that has, a month of open slots for you just to put copy and images into to draft, you can get into a good flow and you can just go and pre-plan the whole month while you have the attention, while you have the focus. And then on the days that it's supposed to be posted, it's already done, and it requires a much lower level of inertia to be able to overcome to actually get that content out there. If it's already made, it's already drafted, you don't have to think about it as much. I would really recommend batching. I like to do content planning by the month, if possible, but I have started finding that doing it weekly has made it a little easier for me. So maybe doing smaller batches on a pre-planned template would be very effective for you. I would recommend you give that a try.
That's a great idea. And I think you've mentioned Hootsuite previously in this and some of the other platforms. I believe, if I remember correctly, Hootsuite will let you schedule things ahead. And Facebook has their Creator Studio, I believe it's called, which will let you do the same. So as long as, I think you have to have the business profile with that, but that's free otherwise, once you already have the business profile, and it will let you schedule both to Facebook and Instagram. And I think actually it was one of the things that reminded me, they have a little tab where you just click on it and it says image alt text and stuff like that, where you can add all of that accessibility in right away.
Yes, I still think it's interesting that Instagram was the last one to integrate that, given that they are a visual platform, but that's just me. As it stands, you can schedule natively on any of those platforms. It can be Twitter also has a post scheduler, Facebook has a post scheduler. That can be the way to leverage it, again, if you're focused on budget. Hootsuite, while it has been effective, they are changing their free account to make it much less effective. It used to be that you could have up to 3 accounts and you could post like 30 posts ahead of time. I think they're taking it down to 2 accounts and like 5 posts. So you're not going to get too far ahead, but if you're doing it weekly, it still might be a very easy, free account to an aggregator that'll make your life a little bit easier. Sprout Social also does that. Mautic does that. Again, it depends on what your budget is. But if your budget is 0, Hootsuite does have that free option, and each of the platforms also has their own scheduler as well. Yeah, so a CMS, for anybody who doesn't know, is a content management system, which is essentially the backbone on which most websites are built. So I'm sure all of you have seen ads for Wix or Squarespace, or you've seen websites built on WordPress, things like that. Content management systems are difficult to recommend because it really does have to do with your own technical prowess. If you happen to already know how to code very well or work with code templates, WordPress is incredibly robust, low barrier to entry, very easy to find plugins, generally secure. I'm going to put that in air quotes because they tend to have one big security bug every couple of years. Drupal is another one of those code backbones, is a little less accessible, but finding contractors to manage that is a little bit cheaper, because it's a little less labor intensive than building a website from scratch or doing custom CSS. I really like Squarespace. I have also had good experiences with Wix in terms of the design on rail providers. I used to recommend Webs. They have not kept up with the times. Their on Rails designer is very old fashioned. It will make your website look incredibly dated incredibly quickly. Yeah, those are probably the best and worst of those options. I would say WordPress, that's a Swiss Army knife. If you can handle it, I would work in that. Under that, Squarespace and Wix, and then under that, Drupal, Webs, smaller providers.
And thank you all for your time tonight. Enjoy.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you.